Today we'll learn about, this is the bigger section of things, why communication changes and what to do, communication tips, changing relationships between care partners and the person who's affected by dementia, but that could be between you and them as well. Managing different behaviors, using the IDEA strategy, which is a strategy for how to kind of help somebody whose behaviors are changing. It might be difficult. What are the needs of care partners in our community? And finally, Alzheimer's San Diego and you. What can we do to provide services for all of you as employees, but also what you can do to help get our services to your clients? So why communication changes and what to do? So communication changes are symptoms of a progressive disease, right? We talked about that a lot in the first half. The brain is changing. So there's going to be the person who has dementia, they're going to have difficulty finding or understanding words. Their brain doesn't work in that same way anymore. They're going to have challenges connecting what is seen and what is heard. So just because they can see it in front of them and you can tell them doesn't mean that their brain is going to put those pieces together. And you'll notice that, for instance, like mealtime. Are you hungry? Yeah, I'm hungry. Well, then why don't you eat your soup? What soup? And the soup is literally right in front of them. And then it's like, I don't want soup. And it's like, 5 minutes ago, you said you wanted soup. We just talked about this. And that's why it can get so exasperating and tiring. But just because they can hear something or they said something doesn't mean that that is connected to the physical world around them. It just does, their brain isn't working in that same way anymore. They can have a difficulty filtering out background noise. So this is really critical. For the rest of us, it's much easier to kind of, like there's noise coming down from out in the office here. We're probably not even noticing it. But for somebody who has dementia, their brain may not be functional and they may be struggled and easily distracted by other kinds of noise, So that means like if you're trying to help somebody in a grocery store and you're trying to give them directions, it may be very difficult for them to follow directions because even if you're talking at them, the noise of all kinds of other stuff, right? When you really think about it, a supermarket is a really loud environment. So that might not be the best environment for you to try to give them some instructions, right? And that's a common care partner mistake, right? You're just walking through the supermarket and you're trying to tell, your person who has Alzheimer's, after we do this, we're going to have to go to the doctor because you have that appointment or whatever. And they can't process all that stuff at the same time. That's too many things. Primary and secondary language confusion. I was bringing this up before. If they speak multiple languages, they may go in between those languages speaking, but they may also have a hard time understanding, especially if it's not their first language. So somebody who, grew up speaking Spanish, and even if they know English, may, as dementia gets worse, have a hard time taking instructions or even hearing things in the more recent language. So you have to be very catering with that sort of thing and understand that they may struggle between the two, and you might need to switch along with them and repeat things in different ways. Repetition of statements or questions. This is going to happen all the time. The example I gave you with the couple that was here last week. Okay, it's time to go. Okay, it's time to go. Okay, it's time to go. He said it like 3 or 4 times within like 5 minutes. Like he just kept on, because in his routine, they finish up the class and they just leave. And so why were they still standing around? She couldn't, there was no way he was going to process and understand they needed to wait a few more minutes. It just wasn't going to get through to him. And you'll find this a lot more on the question side. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why is the soup here? Because you said you were hungry a few minutes ago. I'm not hungry now. It's like, again, I don't mean to, people who have dementia are not children, but you can see parallels sometimes when you're dealing with a little kid who things kind of get chaotic. It's a similar kind of mindset. It's like, it's just that kind of from point A to point B is not there as much anymore. So you might have to say, they're going to have to repeat themselves a lot. They're going to ask the same question over and over and over again. And also, as the brain loses function, it's harder to regulate emotions. And so some people will get very frustrated when they're being told the same thing over and over again, even though they're not getting it. But also they can get frustrated when they feel like they're trying to communicate with you and it's not getting through. But again, they may not be communicating in a way that's as useful anymore, and they don't know that because their brain can't process all those things in the same way. So you might be having a hard time understanding them, and they may be more emotionally volatile. They may have mood swings or other things because they can't control that as much anymore. And they get frustrated because we all get frustrated when we can't communicate ourselves, right? And this is going to be a greater challenge over time. So remember, when interacting with a person with dementia, their ability to deal with something may fluctuate. Again, they can go in and out of different kinds of moments. And so there could be a moment where they really are focused and it seems like it's working, and a couple minutes later that could all disappear. So don't assume that their ability and capacity to be communicated with or to communicate with you is the same every moment. It could change from moment to moment. repetition is going to be required. In almost every case, you're going to have to repeat yourself on some level, And that's why sometimes writing things out or other things can help. But like I just said a moment ago, just because you put it on a piece of paper and are saying it doesn't mean that they can connect all those ideas. So don't assume that's going to work, but know that you're going to have to probably repeat things and find different ways of communicating things. Again, documentation may help. One of the things that is very helpful is to create, for instance, like if you're going to do a list of things, to create a checklist, or have documents or have things, but try to keep them simple, because the more that you can simplify communication when you're working with someone who has dementia, the better. Use compassionate communication techniques. We're going to talk about some of those in a little bit, but try to really emphasize how they're feeling about something and not factual information, So I'll give you an example. My grandmother, one day, I was rushing off to work, and I would go outside the house, and she had this big passenger van that she used to drive around. And one of the tires had gone flat. So she was going to change the tire by herself by putting 2x4s underneath the van until she raised it enough to change the tire. That's extremely dangerous, because the whole thing could fall over and kill her. And I flipped out. What are you doing? You can't do that. And so I started focusing on the facts. You can't put 2x4s underneath a van, especially on like sort of like half concrete, half mud. Like, this is all dangerous. Like, obviously this is dangerous. How could you not know this? None of that was helpful. What would have been really helpful? Why do we have to do this right now? Are you okay? What can I do to help? Hey, a better way to approach it would have been, hey, what are you doing right now? Oh, we have this, the van, the tire's flat. Do we have to do this right now? Can we wait a little bit? Okay, well, you're in a rush right now. Where do you need to go? Can we wait? Can we call the person and ask? Oh, no, okay, we can't call them. Okay, you really, really need to do this right now. Okay, well, do you mind maybe if I call one of your friends to get us some more help? Because I'm sure we could do this faster if we can maybe get some help to go. You see what I'm seeing? Like, I'm not just, oh my God, you're dangerous and can't you know to do better? That's how I tried to approach it in my 20s. Today, after having extensive training, I know now you got to approach it more from that side, but generally trying to approach it with facts, trying to be compassionate towards the situation. What is it? What's going on in that moment? And how can you help them in that moment, rather than, like just focusing on what you need or what your worries or things or concerns are. So trying to really use very compassionate communication where you can, And finally, you have to take care of yourself, because it gets exhausting. Right? Like what I just told you takes a lot of brain energy to kind of like, okay, how do I work my way around this instead of just addressing it directly, And so it can be very tiring. You think that if you're doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like if you're caring for your spouse and it's like this all the time, it's not even just physically exhausting, it's mentally exhausting that you constantly have to be changing and adapting all the time to work with them. So just be conscious of that. There might be some self-care that's necessary there to take the time for yourself too, And that means sometimes just walking out of the conversation and taking a moment before coming back into it. So also remember, communication is more than just language. Tone, the facial expression that you use, your posture, your body language and movement, the physical interactions that you have with people, the behavior that you generally demonstrate, and also theirs towards you. You might notice that you're speaking in a certain way and they're agreeing and nodding, but you're noticing they're getting more agitated. The communication may not be working in the way that you expected it to. So don't just assume it's just language. We all communicate in a lot of ways that connect us as people, but you have to be very conscious of that as you connect with somebody. Remember I said a moment ago, I could have said to my grandmother, hey, what are you doing? But I could say, hey, what are you doing? Or, hey, what are you doing? Those two different tones are very different and imply something of, I'm already walking in frustrated. Well, I'm not going to get a good response. Again, the emotional side of people still works very, very well, even at advanced stages of dementia. So they're still going to pick up on some of that. So the more you can try to be calm about it, but again, that takes self-care. But just be conscious of that everything that you're going to do. And this is hard for care partners, right? Because again, if you're doing this all day, day in and day out, at some point it can get really tiring. It can be really hard. And it's going to be hard to regulate some of this, your tone, your face, your expressions, those sort of things, So be aware of that. But even for yourself, because you may be interacting with clients who have dementia, and if you're having a tough day at work and you may already be a little cross or annoyed, you may walk into a situation and even if you're trying to be compassionate, your face or something else may not be conveying what the kind of message you really want that'll help them to take the next step. So here are some of our broader communication tips to connect with somebody. Maintain good eye contact and physical position. Remember, I also said that people are not only losing hearing sometimes because of disease, but they're also losing eyesight. So trying to talk at somebody who's in another room who has dementia, not very helpful. It's much more important to go be in front of somebody. Try to maybe be on the same level so that you're in eyesight with them, Try to find a way of connecting with them closely, especially if it's a loud environment or something else, so that they can hear you properly. So be conscious of where you are physically and how you're interacting with them, but the more you can be in front of them. Now, that said, especially considering some of the cultural considerations, that can be rude in some situations. So be conscious and see how that works. Try to develop a rapport with somebody so you know where to station yourself, but be conscious of how you physically place yourself with somebody so that way you can make sure that that you're communicating carefully with them. Offer an introduction, even if it's somebody you know. Hey, Bianca, why are you using the laptop right now? And even that's not a great example, honestly. Because why would I ask it that way, What are you doing with the laptop? Some of our instructors, because they used to work in care facilities, are brilliant at this. Like just the way they naturally empathize and just kind of not only physically situate themselves, but just immediately introduce themselves, over and over and over again, Hey, it's me, it just kind of sort of bringing them into the conversation, not just shooting off information at them. Because again, remember, their brain doesn't process it the same way anymore. So sometimes starting the relationship again, if you will, in that moment, especially if their memory has really gotten far enough along and they're in more severe stages, they may not remember who you are. Again, this could be somebody's spouse and they may not remember who you are. So you might have to kind of reintroduce yourself, Pay attention to your tone and volume, So try to be careful about how you deliver the things, but also be careful about how loud or how low you get, especially if their hearing is starting to go away or it's a noisy environment. You may need to raise your voice a little bit. But so be conscious of how that is. Because also, remember, somebody may be sensitive, and if it gets too loud, that may be too much. So trying to gauge that all the time is critical. Give yourself plenty of time. This is frequently what happens with care partners, and that's partially because the world around us is moving at such a rapid pace. Give yourself time to communicate what's going on. Hey, we need to go into the store for 5 minutes so we can go get bread and milk, and then we're going to go to the doctor. So what are we going to go do? And they may not even remember, but at least you tried communicating with that. You're going slowly. You may have to, ask them so they can repeat it to see if they got it, So give yourself time. I find a lot with care partners that where they really get stressed is they're trying to do so much really rapidly, and the person with dementia can't keep up. You gotta slow activities down, but slowing down for communication. This means in a case where you may be working with people who have dementia, again, you might need a lot of time to get through a conversation. So if you're just like, I only got 5 minutes for this person, you might be in trouble. If you're already rushing, you may be in trouble with somebody with dementia because they need a lot more time. They need a lot more effort. Things go a lot slower. So communicating more slowly, giving yourself the time to make sure that you have the time to communicate the message. And again, consider ways to communicate with other senses. It could be touch. Maybe it's like a gentle thing on the shoulder. If that's something you've already built a rapport with somebody about, you shouldn't just randomly touch people, of course, but make sure that you're very careful about that. But if you have that kind of rapport and that comfort with somebody, maybe it's a touch, maybe it's other sorts of things like scents or music or other things, So that's something we do recommend to people's. For instance, are they having a bad day? Like you're trying to communicate something and it's just getting out of control. Maybe put on some music and just take a break. And some music that they love, and that'll help them to kind of calm down a little bit, things like that. So think about other ways to communicate things, whether it's touch, whether it's scent, whether it's other kinds of sounds and things like that. Just don't, too often care partners get in the habit of just talking at somebody with dementia, and the person with dementia can't receive it. Their brain doesn't work that way anymore. Like we talked about in the last section, hearing may be affected already, but their brain's ability to process has changed. So again, when I worked with the person with the traumatic brain injury, even though she was in her 20s, I would have to repeat things frequently and kind of go over stuff again and go over little portions of things again so that she could slowly understand and build something. So we would do a training with her, and then afterwards she and I would just stay and I would just answer her questions because she wouldn't understand all the stuff that was being done in the training for everybody else. Her brain just didn't process it at the same speed or in the same way, And even something that seemed simple to me was complex for her, right? Set yourself up for success, especially if you're going to have a tough conversation, but in any environment, have slow, clear speech. Emphasize each word, take your time with it. Don't baby talk at people. Don't make them feel stupid, but be very careful about your tone. You'll notice I talk really fast. If I'm working with someone who has dementia, I really have to be hyper conscious of really slowing down even more than I usually think I do, which for me feels really, 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 really slow. But I have to do that because if I go at my normal speed, it's too much. It's too much to process. Again, take your time. Just really make time for this. Go slowly. Try to emphasize the key points, Have a plan if you need to. Adapt the physical environment. So really minimize distractions. This is something where care partners tend to get frustrated, especially when they're at home, is that somebody will start to look over at the television or kind of drift off or whatever. They can't control it, but the care partner gets frustrated because you're not paying attention to me. The brain isn't working in that same way anymore. So you know what helps? Try to take down other sorts of noises. Try to minimize other distractions. Maybe have a conversation where there's less things in their eyesight. So maybe even position them where there isn't other things for them to look at. If you're sitting in the middle of a crowded mall in a food court and you're trying to tell somebody with dementia something, they're really not going to get it because it's loud. There's all kinds of people moving around. There's all sorts of colors and things like that. And their brain may not be able to focus on you. So maybe that's not where to do it. If you're out running errands, maybe you need to pull them aside. Maybe go back to the car, those sorts of things. You got to be conscious of the environment, how it affects their brain in that situation, And again, just repeat as often as needed because the short-term memory doesn't work anymore, So that's why it's sometimes also helpful to have some kind of tool on the side, like checklists or other things that might help them for that sort of thing, And you'll find, for instance, in a care facility, they'll, for instance, put up a list of all the things that everybody has to do in the morning to take care of themselves. Brush your teeth, do this, do that, You and I don't need that, but somebody with dementia may need to have those sorts of things always available to them, A great tip I heard was if you're going to go run errands with someone with dementia, make a list of it. Now, don't have a list of 20 things to go do. That's too many things. But if you're going to go to the grocery store, go to the pharmacy, and then stop by your friend's house to go pick up that thing, put that on a list, And that way, they have something else to refer to that's not just you telling them, because it's not going to stay in their memory. They're not going to remember 5 minutes later, where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going? So be conscious of that. You're going to have to repeat it and find other ways of kind of reconvening the information because the short-term memory does not work. You cannot assume that person can remember those brief things. So when you're trying to give instructions, really simplify and make them very, very, very simple, right? If I was going to tell you how to make a sandwich, if I told you, okay, well, pull out the bread, pull out the peanut butter, pull out the jelly, the peanut butter's in the jelly's over here, then you're going to go get a knife and all that. That's actually that's hard to remember, right? Even now, it's probably, without us having dementia, that's hard to remember. You may have to make it, okay, why don't you go get the bread? The bread's in the bread box. And that's the instruction, and see if they can do it. And that's okay. So try to simplify, and really make things real clear, give very short, simple instructions. Try to take out extra knowledge that may not be necessary. Oh, well, remember, there's 2 kinds of jelly in the fridge, blah, 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 blah. Maybe you just let them choose whatever jelly they want. Does it really matter? So try to simplify the instructions and simplify how you're guiding them towards things. Again, address them directly. And that means physically, but also talk to them and help them to understand it's about them, You are going to go get the bread from the red box rather than go get some bread from the bread box. That little bit of change helps them to know that it's for them, especially if you're physically with them, guiding them towards it. If you're saying you are going to go versus me in another room being get the bread from the bread box. Yeah, you might be able to do that today with your spouse. That may not work with somebody who has dementia. They may just be sitting there and be what are they talking about? Why are they talking about bread? Even if 5 minutes before you talked about how we're going to make a sandwich. That sort of linear approach, that sort of experience is not happening for them. So you can't assume that. So you got to kind of guide them along the way. Avoid baby talk or elder speak. Do you feel like you want a sandwich right now? Don't do that. They're adults. They're not children, Talk to them like you would a child, to like a normal adult. It's respectful of them, but also it'll help them to understand it. If you start dumbing it down for them, that just makes it more complicated. They were an adult for many, 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 many years. They're still going to be responsive to an adult approach. And this happens a lot with people, especially as they get to the severe stages. People see them in a wheelchair, or they can't communicate as well or whatever. And so they assume I have to dumb down that. No. Don't do that. Don't treat them like children. They will respond better if you still treat them like a fully functioning adult, with the caveat again that you're still adjusting and making these kinds of changes for them, so that way they have something to help guide them. And finally, just take a deep breath and try again later sometimes. Sometimes there's just not a way to get through in these situations. And this is something to really encourage professionals, but also really like family care partners and care partners in general. With dementia, you're going to probably, in some cases, especially as the diseases get worse, lose more battles than win. And sometimes it just doesn't matter. Sometimes you just got to not do it in that moment. And it may not be about you as the care partner. It may be about the moment that person is in. And this happens a lot when people are feeling like they're resistant or other things. Yeah, that may be a moment that they cannot control. And you forcing that moment is only going to make it worse for both of you. Instead of maybe just saying, you know what, we don't need to have a sandwich right now. At the same time, can't just cancel a doctor's appointment unless somebody really goes bad. So sometimes you might have to get somebody to do it no matter what. So it's a tough balance, but sometimes you just got to back up and try again later and not worry about it too much. And that means sometimes, again, putting ourselves aside and assuming that just because we thought that was the right moment for something, that may not be the right moment for something. So try not to, and this is the tough part, argue with people, Grandma, why are you trying to put the 2x4s there? Because I need to go to Tijuana today. Like, arguing with her was not going to be helpful, correcting, like, well, I can just put the 2x4s underneath her. No, you can't. You have to use a jack. Correcting somebody like that isn't helping. It's only making the conflict worse. Remind the person that they forgot. This is something that care partners do all the time, is like, well, don't you remember? Oh, you forgot. You forgot that we were going to the doctor's office today. I told you 2 days ago you had an appointment and you forgot. They can't control their memory anymore. And again, this is the primary symptom of dementia, is memory loss. That's the most likely thing they'll lose. Help reminding people that they forgot something doesn't make them feel any better about it, doesn't help them to actually process it. And we're saying that because it helps us, because we think we're right. That's not useful, right? Don't question or quiz their recent memory. This happens all the time. This, for instance, used to happen at when we used to train people to do tours at the museum. We had tours for people who had dementia at my museum. And the thing I could not get a lot of the people we would train over is like, so you remember 5 minutes ago when we were talking about Ansel Adams? No, they don't remember. They have dementia. They don't remember that. So you just treat every new moment like a new moment. It's fun, and you just live with that. But I got in an argument one time with an older gentleman who was one of the tour guides. Well, if they don't remember that, then they won't understand my tour. Well, then you don't have a tour if it's all based on memory. You can't give a tour to somebody who doesn't have memory. Well, why are we even touring these people? Well, that's really inhumane. Everybody should have an opportunity to be here, whether they have short-term memory or not. So I'm saying that because questioning, like, hey, do you remember the 3 things we need to do today? No, they don't remember the 3 things they need to do today. Turn it around. We have 3 things that we're going to do today. Oh, I remember what they are. Oh, okay. Just okay. Well, what are they? I mean, this is where care partners get all spun out. It's frequently communication. It's one of the biggest things. That's why we front load this at the training. We teach this communication skills class all the time, by the way. People we so heavily rely on memory every moment, but they can't. And yet we get in the habit of trying to pull this out of them all the time. We can no longer expect that. So be conscious of that. Accept that that's not there. But try not to ask them to remember stuff because it's not useful. They don't remember. Just assume they don't remember. Not in an inhumane way of like, you're not going to remember this. Don't say that. But just know that you might have to repeat things and reiterate information. That's okay. That's fine. It makes it easier on them too. And finally, don't take it personally. Like none of what they're doing, and you're gonna hear me say this a bunch for the rest of this hour, none of what they're doing is under their control or about you or the care partner. And this is a hard thing to train the care partners on, is after a while you start to take it personally. In that situation I was telling you about with my grandmother, where she was trying to put the 2x4s underneath her car. I mentioned at the beginning of that story that I was on my way to work. So part of the reason I was impatient and frustrated with her is because I was supposed to be going to work. And I was taking it personally that she was keeping me from going to work by doing this, That's not true. She was just on her own vibe. She was just on her own wavelength that she was trying to do something that she would have done in the past. Now, would she have stuck 2x4s under there? Probably not. Remember I talked about people lose their ability to recognize how tools work and how objects work. So that's why she was stuffing stuff in there. She didn't remember that a jack is what she needed to use. Me reiterating and telling her over and over again, you need to use a jack, factually true, not useful for her in that moment. And I was getting more and more upset because I was taking it personally because she was keeping me from going to work. But she wasn't trying to keep me from going to work. That's how I perceived it, being 20-something and being very agitated. But she wasn't trying to. She was just lost in a moment where she was just trying to help herself. She was so independent, used to being independent. She knew she was independent, but she no longer had that level of independence. So we needed to find a different solution in that case. And eventually it became a case where unsafe behaviors like that increased enough, we had to put her somewhere else because we couldn't take care of her anymore, you know? So this is the kind of reality, but you can't take any of that stuff personally. None of what they're doing is about us, you know? And I've heard people say that, well, but they do that because they're trying to get me. They probably aren't. Most people who have dementia can't think that many steps ahead, you know, to really be able to try and manipulate you or something. That's not it. They're just in a different moment. And so sometimes we have to adjust for their moment instead of expecting them to adjust to ours because their brain no longer can give them the ability to do that. So instead, try things like framing statements and requests positively. Please do this versus don't do that. Don't put those things under there. Please, maybe we can call a friend. Please, maybe we can try to find a jack in your car. Please, maybe, you know, try to frame it in the positive side of what we could do, you know? Try to maintain a spirit of generosity and forgiveness. And this is the hardest part because any of us get worn out on trying to do this all the time. And I bring this back around to the care partner's idea too, because remember, you could be possibly caring for your father who has dementia and there's a father you never loved. And you don't really want to have to be generous or forgiving with this person. But here you are in this situation. But this is the key, is to remember that there's still a human person there. They're still having a day-to-day experience. We want to maintain their quality of life, even though they have dementia. And so how do we find a way of forgiving them, giving them an opportunity again and again and again? And it does mean trying again and again and again. So, but how do we try to maintain that as best we can? And remember that kindness may be more important than honesty. This is a really critical one. For my grandmother, going back to that situation with her car, instead of trying to say to her, there's no way you're going to Tijuana today because your car's not going to work. That's not helpful. That's only going to it's only going to exacerbate the situation in terms of me communicating with her versus trying to find a way of saying, let's try to find a solution for this today. And I don't even need to say, because I'm a brutally honest person if you get to know me in work and in real life, not say, maybe we can solve this today, but you might not be able to go. Nobody needs to hear that part. They don't need to hear that part. Emphasize what you can try to do and see what happens. Because the other thing is, it could be that over time they decide to move in a different direction themselves, that they're cognitively, they decide to shift off to something else, but they could still be fixated on it. And you might have to continue working through that thing, you know? It's very hard. This is the hardest part, honestly, at the end of the day. Because as we all get tired, and caring for someone who has dementia is very tiring, it's harder to continue to pull back up that spirit of being kind and generous to people. It gets very difficult, you know? Caring for someone who has dementia, especially as it gets worse and worse, tries our patience. And doing this all the time is not easy. But how do we find a way of doing that? And that's why we're trying to give some tips and also just say, take a break if you need to. We're going to cover more of that at the end. So again, the key here is focusing on people's feelings, the feelings they have in that moment, rather than the factual situation, you know? So I'll go back to another example, that situation I told you about with my grandmother in the newspaper. In that moment, she just wants to have the newspaper and the tactile feeling of that. She wants to have the thing that she's used to and to have that, to that point, almost ceremony of having that in the morning and having somebody bring it to her. Factually, it was unimportant that it wasn't the right newspaper, that it was today's newspaper. That's what kind of boiled out of that. That was hard for my family to understand because they feel like they need to emphasize this, that she needs to have today's newspaper. But what she really needed to do is feel validated that we were coming and that we were giving her something, and that the facts that were even on that piece of paper weren't valuable to her. It was the feeling that we were all going to be there and she could do her ritual, her morning ritual. That was more important, the feelings around that stuff. But even when we're communicating, again, when I was talking with my grandmother about the situation with her car, she was doing this because she really wanted to get out of the house and move around and go, because that's what she did all the time. And she wanted to go to Tijuana. That's what she did all the time. I needed to focus more on that and less on the fact that her car was not working properly. Maybe there's a different solution. Maybe I could have driven her. Maybe we could have taken her to the trolley, something else. But instead I got really hung up on the fact that she was doing something really dangerous instead of focusing on her feelings of feeling like she needed to do something. So it's inverting and thinking about that and reshaping our behaviors around that as we work with these people who are affected by these diseases. This means that for care partners, their relationships are going to be changing. The person who has dementia is changing. They're changing cognitively, like just functionally, they're not able to do as much, but also they're changing emotionally. And so our relationships have to change. And this is tough because we were talking at the cultural considerations portion about hierarchy and other things. Part of the challenges I had with my grandmother was that she was the matriarch. I was the grandchild. I wasn't even just below her. I was 2 steps below her. I didn't tell her what to do. She didn't listen to grandchildren. Grandchildren didn't tell her what was safe and not safe. She was the one who told everybody what was safe and not safe. But relationships are changing, and they don't always understand that because their brain doesn't have that cognitive function as much anymore. So we, as the people in the community, have to be adaptable. So care partners' relationship with a person living with dementia, they can't change what's happening in their brain. The person who has dementia can't change that. We can't force them to understand it. At some point, they may even, just because their brain is not cognitively working that way, even really understand they have a disease. So they can't change that. So again, we have to change. We must adapt and change our responses, the way that we respond to the way that they behave. We have to shape and reshape how we do this. And the care partners are going to have to change what they do. And that's actually going to change both of us over time, you know? Caring for my grandmother, even though I'm telling you that I didn't do as good of a job as I would have liked, changed me and led me to today being very compassionate about these things. But even at that time, I was changing in ways that I wasn't expecting. And I struggled, you know, because it was hard for me to feel so uncomfortable with her and the way I behaved towards her. And I did live with, for a long time, a lot of guilt around that, but then also was able to cope with that by understanding it wasn't my fault because I didn't know about any of these things, you know? This is why we do all of this and why we're trying to train you too. We can help people to understand that as you both change, you can still have a meaningful relationship. So the relationship in itself is changing. It's different than what it's going to be before, you know? It was very hard for my family, for instance, to care for her because she always cared for the rest of us. She was always the one who provided for everybody. So what does that mean when you have to provide for her now, you know? And that's for a lot of our different families in different situations. And it may not be somebody who's older than you. It could be a spouse, for instance. It could be a child. Again, there are people that have early onset Alzheimer's, which is a very specific type of Alzheimer's that starts to hit people in their 40s. Some of you may have children that are in their 40s or 50s. And you might not develop Alzheimer's, but they do. And you might have to help care for them. Think of how difficult that would be. And your relationship is going to change because of that. So this is the nature of it, is we have to help people to address some of that changing relationship. As our lives change around this, one of the ways to help people negotiate these changes is to acknowledge the meaning, the fears, the values, and the history that go along with that, you know? And one of the ways of doing that is to think, what does blank mean to them and what does it mean to me? So I'm going to use an example that will probably be more obvious for all of us. What does driving mean to them and what does driving mean to me? So in the case of my grandmother, she was autonomous. She was an independent person. She did everything. She would pick up stuff and take it down to TJ to donate to families who were in need. You know, she would bring food and other things to her. So taking away driving wasn't just about her independence. It meant that she could no longer give to others. What does her driving mean to me, though? Well, it does mean that she has some independence, so I don't have to care for her all the time. And that's scary, that I might have to drive her around and other things, right? That's a fearful thing. Like, I don't have time. I can't go to TJ all the time and drive her down there to drop off all this stuff and these things. But also, if I let her do it, that's scary to me, you know? Like, she might get in an accident and not know how to reach us. She might get lost somewhere and we don't know how to find her, you know? So this is all these things. So this is a good framing device sometimes, even when you're working with clients, to think about and even encourage them, well, what does that mean to them? And what does it mean to you? And where's that dissonance? Where's that difference between the two that may be causing this challenge in your relationship? Because again, as somebody is developing dementia, and especially with Alzheimer's, as it just gets worse and worse and worse, there's going to be less functional ability. And that means that the roles have to continue changing. And that can be very difficult for people. When my father had leukemia in 2019, he pulled me aside one day. He was very frustrated with me. And he said, the most important thing to me in all of this is that I don't lose my independence. And I understood where he was coming from, but during the period where he needed care, there was going to be a loss of independence. But you could tell that was very important for him, is that he still felt he controlled his own life. Now, I had to be conscious of the fact that if he was to do something that could inhibit the treatment they were giving him, that he could die. And so I'm concerned on that end. And we had to negotiate that on some level over time. And it was difficult because, again, he's my father. It's hierarchy. I don't tell him what to do. He tells me what to do. So managing a lot of that can be very challenging, but using this framing device can help. What does it mean to them? For my father, independence is everything. He's worked his entire life to not rely on other people. And now suddenly he's thrust in this situation where he has to rely on us. Now, I, as the child, I was always taught that I needed to support him though, right? And at the same time, if he loses that, what does that mean? Am I gonna have to move in with him and take care of him for the rest of his life? That's scary too. So we have to be conscious of this, that these changing relationships change how we internally feel about things. And sometimes structuring it this is helpful, especially because some of these common fears, nobody wants to be dependent. Do you want to be dependent on somebody to take you everywhere and do things for you? Nobody really wants that, you know? Nobody wants to feel like they're a burden. This is part of my father's thing and even my grandmother's thing. It's big in my family in general. Nobody ever wants to be a burden. I'm not a burden. But we're all a burden to everybody on a certain level. No offense. I'm not meaning to see it like something mean, but we need to rely on each other. But as responsibilities and other things change, nobody's a burden, but people perceive it that way, especially when there's been a hierarchy in the past. That was my challenge with my grandmother. She didn't rely on us. She didn't want to have to rely on us. So having to give that autonomy over, to have to give over not just the autonomy, but really to feel like a burden, she again herself worked her whole life to not be a burden to anybody. Isolation. This is something that really freaks people out. I would even say with my grandmother, that was some of what was going on. She was afraid that she could no longer connect with people that she was connected to in the community because it's harder, you know? So this is another common fear. I think it's a common fear for all of us, especially if you're talking about maybe somebody's going to lose the ability to drive or to be able to do the things that they were used to doing or whatnot, the choices that they had. So there's a feeling of a fear of isolation. There's a feeling of a lack of privacy. I mean, again, for some people, they need to be bathed by others because their dementia is so significant. That's a real serious invasion of privacy. If you're going to bring somebody into the home to help care for them, that feels like a lack of privacy. The stranger showing up in my home to care for me. So that can make people feel very uncomfortable. And also just overall a loss of control and autonomy, which tends to get defined as, most people say, independence. They're independent. And the reality is that somebody who develops dementia can no longer be independent because of the safety concerns for them and for others. But we can continue to try and emphasize autonomy, their ability to have some control over their life, wherever we can add that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. We also should just acknowledge cultural values. We've talked pretty extensively about that, but that affects when people think about how these relationships are changing, what that means. You know, again, it could be family hierarchies. It can be family situations that they don't know about or that we don't know about or we don't know how they got structured that way. Again, it may not even be a family situation. It could be a neighbor or somebody else in the community. And finally, it might just be personal histories. Everybody's unique. Everybody has different situations, you know? So, for instance, on my side of the family, on my dad's side of the family, they all grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. And so their family is still mostly there. And it's a big community of family. They really rely on family. But when they came to California to go to universities and to kind of grow their careers and things, everybody got really spread out. So they're still coming from a personal history where you always knew that the family was down the street, but they don't live in that situation anymore. So I even talked to my father at one point recently about maybe as you get older, maybe you should move closer to your brothers who live in the Bay Area. So that way they wouldn't be as far away and you could support each other. Because he's down here in San Diego, right? That's an hour-long flight, right? 8-hour drive or whatever. Like what if my sister and I are not able to live in San Diego anymore? Who's going to help take care of him? And of course, what's his response? Oh no, I'll find a way of taking care of myself. That's not how the world works, right? But that's the personal history where they haven't really thought through those things because when they were growing up, you know, all the viejos, all the older adults, they all were able to be supported by the family because it was all there. But they're not all in that situation anymore, you know? But they haven't really thought through that yet. So these personal histories, these cultural values can affect this and it makes people rethink about the relationships that are changing. So just be conscious of these things as you help navigate in your personal lives or with your clients, but help them to understand too. Their relationships are changing with the people around them because of this disease. And it's going to be hard. There's a lot of emotional stuff that goes along through this, you know? And I personally, especially having worked here for a little bit more than a year now, think that support groups are one of the most important things that people can do around that. We offer extensive support groups. I'll talk about that more at the end of this presentation. So setting up success in regards to talking about these changing relationships, either if you have to be involved, but also if you're trying to help somebody else in the community, prepare for the conversation. Do some research, have a detailed record of things that happened, you know, especially if it's an initial conversation around dementia, especially if you're concerned about somebody having dementia. And this may even be that you're guiding somebody in the community where you're talking to somebody and she says, I'm afraid my husband may be developing Alzheimer's. You may want to encourage her to start taking a record of things that she's concerned about, dates, times, other stuff. So that way, if you sit down, there's a record of kind of, here's some of the things that I'm concerned about in specifics, not, well, I just noticed that you're getting lost more often. But you remember 2 weeks ago, you said you went to the store, you came back with 3 items, but you were gone for 3 hours and I didn't know where you were and I was calling you, you didn't pick up your phone. And that worried me, That way you have evidence. It's easier to have conversations around these discussions when there's evidence around some of this, Give yourself plenty of time. These conversations are hard. Whenever you're talking about this kind of social, emotional things between people's relationships, everybody's going to want to talk extensively. So you got to make a lot of time for it because it hurts people's feelings to talk about, how these things change. My father and I have been going on an ongoing conversation since his cancer treatment about our changing relationship, and it's hard. And sometimes I just can't do all of it. Like, I don't have the energy, but he doesn't have the energy either. So I do little chunks. And then we won't talk about it for a couple months, and I'll bring up another little thing about, hey, as your eyesight's getting worse, like, what are we going to do if you're not able to drive? I don't want to talk about that. And like, you can't just assume that. Well, but it might happen, right? And so sometimes I got to introduce an idea and then let him bring it up later, things like that. So you got to make a lot of time for these sorts of longer conversations, And especially when it's related to dementia, there may be a lot of other fears and other things like we were talking about that make the conversation difficult. Get the right people involved if necessary, including us if you need to. But try to see if there's a way that maybe a doctor can be involved or other things if it requires that sort of thing, if there's a need for that, especially if it relates to some kind of independence or autonomy like driving, because there are safety concerns and other things you might have to help somebody understand this is no longer a safe situation for you or for somebody else or for the public, things like that, So get support. And again, our organization is here for that sort of thing. Our dementia experts is what we call them. They're called clinical care coaches. Can you actually even do meetings? We have a little meeting room right here where you can have a little family meeting and they can sit down with somebody and explain and help to be somebody who helps as a counselor almost to kind of navigate some of that. But they might be you as a PACE worker, or as a Sandy Cedar health worker to help be the person who gets brought in to help explain some of this or be that other objective sort of thing, And finally, make a personal appeal. I'm worried about your safety. Let's talk with your doctor. I'll go with you or I'll try it too. For instance, this is one that we really encourage people when they're concerned about doing a memory test. That's that diagnostic tool. Like if I was concerned about my father doing it, because I know if I told my dad like, hey, you should go get a memory test, he'd be kind of offended. But if I was like, what if we both go get a memory test together so we can both start getting a baseline? He would probably agree to that, He would think that's a good idea, because he's helping take care of me. I'm not taking care of him, he's helping me, Not that he's that condescending, just, we're doing it as a group, that sort of thing. So think about this, is as people are needing to communicate and navigate these relationships, preparing for the conversations and preparing for the stuff, having time to have these discussions, getting the right people involved, making a personal appeal, these can kind of help to navigate some of it. Because again, especially when people have Alzheimer's, it's going to continually change because they're going to be declining in ability. And so this may come up over and over and over again. Any questions before we move on? I know I kind of gave a very high-level overview of how to navigate these changing relationships because I can't speak to any individual situation. But that's also why we have our clinical care coaches. They're here to give that personalized advice. On the education side, I give the broad strokes. But if you need assistance, whether it's dealing with a client or even somebody in your life, but one of your clients needs that, that's where you come and talk with them. And they can give very personalized things. Maybe try approaching it this way. Have you tried looking at it this way? Was the doctor involved in that conversation? Maybe you need to try it again, but in the doctor's office, that sort of thing, So now let's talk a little bit about managing behaviors, because right at the end of the day, people who have dementia are going to be at times difficult to work with, difficult to be around, and so we have to help to try and manage some of the difficult behaviors. Caring for a person with dementia is challenging because again, their needs are always changing. It can be very day in and day out with the change. There's a lot of physical demands, especially as the diseases grow worse. Especially with Alzheimer's, people are losing physical ability. And so that is like, you might have to help people to take a shower or get into bed or all these other things. There can be sleep disruption. They can have sleep disruption, but also they can disrupt your sleep which means that people are fatigued because they're not getting enough rest. There can be social isolation. This happens a lot. For instance, I was talking to someone recently. They were going to take a trip. They were hoping to see one of their cousins who has Alzheimer's. And that person's wife said, I don't know if we can, we never have time. We never have time. They become socially isolated. She's so overwhelmed as a caregiver that she can't make time for other people to come. That's actually not healthy, even though it's very difficult, because again, it can be very day to day. But that isolation can become very difficult on everybody. Now, fortunately, they were able to do it, and they were all able to get together, and it helped everybody. But it's very easy to fall into a situation where you're so overwhelmed, especially if you're the sole care partner, that you become isolated because you can't even deal with any other sorts of things. You have no idea. You can't predict what the behaviors are going to be like. Again, you might just encounter challenging behaviors, resistance, other things. I mean, that's the big one. Is frequently you'll find that people with dementia are resistant. And again, we can't blame them. Their mind does not work in the same way that ours does. And frequently, for any of us, if you're confronted by something in some way, your brain shuts down and stops. And so think, if your brain is not processing in the same way, not processing language, numbers, step-by-step activities, the world around you in the same way, there's almost a defensive mechanism to try and stop things that are happening, but we still have to get through a day. You still got to get somebody to take a shower and brush their teeth and eat food, right? You know, so resistance is a reality that wears a lot of care partners out. Just like for those of you who maybe have been parents, and resistance from children. Again, just resistance in general, even if it's a coworker, it's exhausting. So be conscious of that. So common personality and behavioral changes in people with dementia. Again, their decision-making and judgment is affected. They can't think through things in the same way that we do anymore. They may not recognize when things are safe or not safe. They may not recognize how to do step-by-step kind of processes. Things that maybe even were very easy for them before, like taking a shower, like brushing their teeth, like making a sandwich, you know? They may be agitated and combative, and that's because their brain is no longer functioning in the same way. It doesn't have the same capacity, and so they may get more easily agitated, distracted, other things, but then that could cause them to be combative, to push away. And that means even sometimes physically, people who have dementia can become physically violent, you know, and that makes them a risk for us even as people who are helping them in the community. They're going to have difficulty with initiation and termination of tasks. So what we mean by that is it's hard to start a task, but sometimes it's hard to stop them from doing tasks too. And I'll try to send some resources over afterwards, like some videos and things that you can check out, because I wasn't sure if we'd have time for them. But there's this really interesting video of this woman who's in a care facility who she's going around with like a shaker, like a maraca, and she's like banging it on all these chairs. And you can see the person who works at the care facility is trying to get her to stop, and she doesn't want to stop. Like she somehow initiated this task and just won't stop doing it, you know, because she becomes so hyper fixated on it, and it's really annoying. You're watching the video and she's just tapping it on all these chairs. If somebody does that for like 5 minutes, it'd be one thing. 30 minutes later, you'd probably just be like, "Would you please stop?" But they don't know when to stop sometimes, and that's okay. Their brain just doesn't work in that same way. And the cool thing about that video is the woman essentially teaches in the video how to kind of like move the task towards something else. And she's able to actually get the woman, especially because in that situation, she knows the woman likely has to use the bathroom. And of course, if she doesn't get her to use the bathroom, she might soil herself just because she got so caught up in beating little maraca, you know? So she helps her to kind of change the task and eventually gets her to go to the bathroom. It's really like you watching it like, it's so brilliant, but it's a practice skill. This woman's like the foremost expert on, you know, helping people with dementia. So she's really good at all that stuff. But so just keep that in mind. It might be harder to get them to start something like, hey, did you start making the sandwich yet? Hey, are you going to make the sandwich? Are you going to make the sandwich? And no, they just don't get around to it. But also you might walk in and they made 4 sandwiches. And you're like, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, I'm making sandwiches for the day. And it's like, I only need you to make 1 sandwich. It's like, what are you doing, you know? And they don't know any different. Their brain's just not doing it the same way ours is. Confabulation, like what they mean by that is like they may escalate ideas and tie ideas together. For instance, my grandmother, when she was in her care home and her dementia had gotten off to like this very, like far more extreme point, she was certain that the care staff were stealing stuff from her. Nothing was getting stolen. Everything was in her room. Everything was there. And it didn't even matter, again, no factual stuff. Look, the socks are right there. The socks are in your drawer. That didn't matter. Her feelings had gotten so far along that she was certain that everybody was stealing from her. She just had that sort of, unfortunately, sort of paranoid approach to things. And so it just got worse as her dementia got worse. But nobody was stealing from her. She confabulated a whole thing around because she couldn't find her socks. that therefore somebody must have stolen them from her. She created this whole situation. That's not what happened at all. But trying to fight her on that wasn't helpful. Instead, well, hey, maybe we can find a different pair of socks. Hey, I'm looking in this drawer. Oh, here's another pair of socks. Is this the one? Maybe these would work? Don't even try to convince her that they're the socks that she was looking for. Don't even bother with that. Maybe move the socks somewhere else and say, what if we check in this drawer? Oh, here's another pair of socks. I mean, how are they going to know the difference? And you're not dehumanizing them in that way. You're just trying to help guide them towards a different circumstance of things, you know? But so be aware. They may conflate or create ideas that aren't actually happening. This happens with the police sometimes, for instance. They'll go into a home and somebody who has dementia will accuse the person of who's caring for them of abusing them. And of course, the police have to look into that. And there's times where it's not true, that they're not being abused, but you know, they've created this whole idea in their mind. You know, and they're adults, so we have to listen to them. And at the same time, it's a confabulation, it's a creation around things. So just be conscious of that. Because again, they're not perceiving the same world, and they're interpreting and thinking about the world differently than we are. So they may come to a different conclusion. Even if it's not true, it's true to them. It's their feelings. Suspicion or paranoia, like I was talking about my grandmother, like they can become very suspicious of things. And even in cases where it's even people they know, you know, and sometimes this can drag out certain kinds of even sometimes biases and things that they might have that they had under control when their brain was working differently. But now that it's not, that suspicion or paranoia bumbles to the surface. For instance, there are people, yes, who become more openly racist because of their dementia, because they just lose control over some of those fears and other things. So just be conscious of this, you know. They may not have a lot of understanding of how to care for themselves, right? Like they may have lost the ability to understand how to care for themselves, or to not understand how much care they may actually need and support. And this is especially true for those of you who are working through PACE or other healthcare systems, is they frequently don't think they need as much help as they do, you know? And it's like, so you could be asking them about like, well, so you're mentioning you're having these frequent bathroom accidents, you know, maybe you just need a little bit of support for that. And again, if you're talking about a situation where that scares them, where somebody would need to help them go to the bathroom, think about like, for instance, an older woman who like, that would be a huge violation of her privacy. She may deny and just act and try to downplay those bathroom accidents when actually she needs more help. So be conscious of this, is they may not be able to be the most truthful perspective on the care that they need. You almost always have to have some other people that are helping to get some perception on that. And that's tough because remember, especially for adults who are living alone, they're still legally allowed to make their own decisions. So I'm going to give you a really tough example about that. We had an example from last year where an older gentleman was living in, he'd become unhoused, he'd become homeless, if you will, and was living in a facility, like they'd given him an apartment or something like that. His Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where he could no longer control his ability to go to the bathroom. So when they entered the apartment, there was feces and urine all over the apartment, everywhere, because he could just no longer understand when to go or not go to the bathroom. So I mean, this is an extremely unhealthy living situation, right? Not just for him also, but anybody coming in or even neighbors or other things. This could cause very serious issues. And yet they couldn't just have him leave the apartment because he's an adult and he gets to make his own decisions, even if he is affected by Alzheimer's. But he was alone. He had nobody to help care for him. And so it had gotten to this state, you know, it had gotten that far along. So it can really get that far. And he did not understand that he was living in that kind of situation. He didn't know. He didn't think that he needed help. He refused help from them. Now, of course, we had to pass that along to Adult Protective Services because that now moves into a whole situation around their own well-being, and that's out of our control. But in the initial approach to him, he didn't want to get any help because he didn't think that he needed more help, even though there is, again, filth, that kind of like human waste just on the floor. So keep in mind, but again, he could not process the world in the way that we do. And he could not understand the amount of care that he needed now at this stage. And so he was resistant to getting further help. So again, a person with Alzheimer's, they may see or hear things. I will throw out there that hallucinations are very rare. Most people who have dementias, specifically Alzheimer's, they don't really develop, like they don't see things that don't exist. I will say though, they confabulate, like we talked about, they kind of imagine things, but they don't have actual hallucinations. There's a type of dementia called frontotemporal disorders, and that can cause dementias hallucinations because it affects a certain part of the brain. But that's more rare and very specific. For most dementia and with Alzheimer's, people don't hallucinate, but they may see or hear things that they misinterpreted things, right? They're hearing or seeing it differently than we did. They get lost. They may hit because they get agitated and they don't know how to control their reactions anymore. They may have serious sleep problems because their brain isn't operating that same way anymore. They may have anxieties and other things going along with that, so they may not sleep as well. They may refuse to take medications and other things because they no longer understand the value and need for that. They may not trust others, and that's including of people that they've known for a long time, where they become suspicious of people that they even know. They may get confused very easily around things because, again, their brain isn't processing the information the same way, so it's not as stable in the way that keeps us from getting confused. And again, they may just repeat questions over and over and over and over again. And regardless of how you answer it, it's not going to stick because that memory is just not there. So the key to managing the difficulties with this is to respond versus react. Right? When I walked out of my house and saw my grandmother putting 2x4s underneath her car, I reacted instead of planning and thinking about how to respond to this that was meaningful for her and would help me. Reacting is correcting, confronting, arguing. That's what I tried to do during that situation. Why are you doing this? Don't you know you can't do that? Don't you know this isn't safe? Why do you have to go to Tijuana today? I'm correcting her, I'm confronting her, I'm arguing with her. The focus is on me, right? I was talking at her. I was trying to tell her what she should be doing. A better reaction would respond, validate, reassure, redirect. So the focus is on them. So again, I could have approached it if I was going to validate. Oh my God, you're right. The car's tire is flat. We need to fix this. We need to get you some help to fix this. This needs to be fixed. Because it did need to be fixed, right? It still needed to be fixed at some point. There's no reason I could have validated her feelings around that. Reassure her. I bet you that you can get this fixed. I bet you we can fix it. There's probably a way to get this done. And yeah, maybe you can get to TJ today. You can probably get to TJ today. Let's find a way to get you to TJ today by getting this fixed. Reassure her about how she feels in that moment. Redirect. Let's call somebody else to see if they can get us some help. Do you think we could just put a pause on this until we can see if we can get somebody to bring us the right tools for this? And maybe in the meantime, let's just go wait inside. Let's just go have a sandwich or something. Or let me go take you to go get a burrito while we wait for your friend to come over to help us with this, you know? And who knows, maybe after we have a burrito, maybe she forgets that she was going to go to TJ. Or maybe she comes back and she wants to go to TJ even more. I don't know. We'll find out. But try to redirect and go in a different direction to create a more stable and safe situation for things. So again, responding, making it more about what they're experiencing and focusing on their experience rather than our experience and the things that we need from them. This is where this is the crux of why caregiving, being a care partner is so difficult for most people, is because people fall into reacting all the time. And usually because they're so worried, they're so tired, there's so many things to do. I mean, you think just running your own day-to-day life is difficult. Now you have to take care of somebody else's life and they have less diminished capacity to do that. Again, if you're a parent, you've already experienced some of that. But now you're doing it with a full-blown adult who could say, push you aside or get in a car and drive away. You know? So it's much more difficult and scary. The elevation of fear is highly raised. So it's easy to fall into a situation of reacting versus trying to take a step back and respond to their behaviors and find a way of making it about what they need in that moment. So again, some more of these communication techniques. I'm repeating these because they're the essence of a lot of these things. Calm and reassuring tone, short, clear directions and questions, allow plenty of time, repeat as needed for understanding, validate and agree, and forgive and apologize. You know what? Even in the midst of that conversation with my grandmother, I could have said, I'm so sorry. You're right. You do need to get to TJ today. How can I help you? And that's not what I did. I just kept on arguing with her. That didn't help anybody, But I could have tried to redirect myself even by giving her some forgiveness and apologizing for my own behavior and then just trying to find a new way of going at it, But so again, we repeat these communication techniques over and over and over again because this is the essence of trying to manage the day-to-day behavior, is trying to adjust the care partner's behavior. That's what can be changed. You can't really change too much about the person who has dementia because their brain does not function in that same way anymore. So when providing care, remember that dementia causes a progressive loss of function. This is something really critical to help people understand. The way that I've been framing this a lot recently is people need to be constantly adaptable. It's always going to be changing, so they always need to be changing along with it. And let's be honest, change is exhausting, right? Trying to change your habits and behaviors and the way you do something is super tiring. It's part of the reason, again, parents are always tired, especially with toddlers. Toddlers are always evolving. So it's just, I can't even imagine. I'm not a parent. I don't want to be a parent because of that. No offense to anybody. But I say that because I've also cared for somebody who has dementia, and it was constantly some new thing would bubble up that I would have never expected. Yesterday you could make a sandwich and today you can't make a sandwich. What happened? Their brain has changed. And maybe tomorrow they will be able to make a sandwich, or maybe they'll never be able to make a sandwich again. Function is going to go away no matter what. And so you have to help them be prepared for that journey of that. The goal is autonomy, not independence. We want to help them still have some control over their lives. But because of this nature of this disease and the risk that it puts them at in terms of safety, but also the risk that it puts care partners and the general community in, people cannot just do whatever they want anymore when this disease gets so bad. Again, the obvious example is driving. We've talked about a number of situations today. Disorientation, loss of vision, loss of being able to see depth, loss of being able to make key judgments and insights, loss of being able to process things step by step. When you think about all those factors of somebody who can't see well, make clear decisions, like be able to recognize and hear things around them, do you want somebody like that behind the wheel of a car? No, those are things that we require so that somebody can drive. So somebody may not be able to drive themselves anymore. And that is a huge feeling of a loss of independence. But there's other ways that we can still keep them involved, right? Hey, we have to go run 3 errands today. We got to go, again, do this, this, and this. Which order do you want to do them in? Do you want to go to the store today? We don't have to. We can go tomorrow if you want. Giving them some kind of control and insight into things, Do you want soup or do you want a sandwich today for lunch? You may not want to ask, what do you want for lunch? That's too many choices. But say, okay, hey, we have 3 kinds of soup. We got bean, tortilla, and chicken. Which one do you want? And just still giving them some sense of that. And if they say, I don't want soup today, well, what do you want? Do you want a sandwich? We have a sandwich. Trying to still give them some ability to make decisions around their day-to-day experience. Because that's still all is very validating and important for us. But they may not be able to be independent. And again, at some point, they'll cross the line where they can't be independent. They can't take care of themselves anymore. Setting reasonable expectations is really critical on this too. Because again, some people just, if they're losing that ability to function, we have to be honest with ourselves that they can't do all those things. So one I'll mention, because we were talking about communication earlier, having the expectation that as somebody's dementia gets far enough along, you do need to communicate with them very face-to-face at their level, be very short, clear. You can't just, be walking in the back of the house and be like, hey, will you remember to pull the bread out? You can't do that anymore. They may not be able to process it in that same way. That's a very minor expectation when you think about it. In the long run, some of these expectations may become, much higher. Yes, the expectation is that in the future, your father is no longer be able to drive and you're gonna have to be able to drive him everywhere. Period. He will no longer have that independence. And trying to set some of that up so that people start understanding the expectations that they may be carrying in the future as well. Being flexible is really critical because again, situations are going to change day in and day out. And because the person's brain is changing, you have to be able to adjust on a day-to-day basis, which is part of the reason it's so tiring. The best thing that people can do is to do tasks with the person and not to them or for them. This will sound like an odd one. Let's take a shower together. Let's brush our teeth together. Let's both make lunch. Involve them. That's one of the ways to keep life meaningful. We're going to talk a little bit about some specifics on that in a moment, but them still feeling like they have a chance to be involved is very vital. Another critical thing is to create a dementia-friendly environment. And this is a tough one to teach people because we get so used to our own environments that we forget that actually our environments inadvertently become chaotic for people. And too many things, too much stimulation makes it difficult for people with dementia to be able to make decisions and be able to kind of manage things. So uncluttered. For instance, you might have like a bathroom where you keep all the stuff out, all the different things. You may just want to take all that stuff away, put it in cabinets, put it behind something else. Like if you know that when they're in the bathroom, that you just need to make sure that they always just brush their teeth, you may just want to make it so that the only things that are out on the counter are just the toothbrush and the toothpaste, just to make sure that that's always really evident that's something you need to do, You might have like a very complicated shower with all kinds of bottles and all that stuff. Maybe you just strip it down to that's just the one soap they use, and that's it. Just to make it easier for them to make decisions, to take away some of that and just get it focused. So also make it prepared with the essential items. So think about like a kitchen. What really needs to be out? Again, especially if there's safety concerns, do you really want them to have the access to the knives? So maybe you don't just keep the knife block out. Maybe you get rid of the knife block and put the knives in a drawer that they don't have as easy access to, you know? But then maybe you actually take like the silverware, and instead of keeping it in a drawer, maybe you actually put it out in like a display or something like that so they can easily find the silverware when they need it. You know, so make the essentials more upfront for them so they don't have to try and process and figure things out as much. Again, minimize distraction, try to minimize sounds, activities. And this is a weird one, but like try to take down mirrors, because mirrors, it just creates more things to look at, you know? So maybe in a home especially, you don't need as many mirrors. Make it accessible, safe, and comfortable in regards to seating. So we mean like don't leave things on the floor, make sure there's lots of open space so that people can navigate, especially if they eventually have to use a walker or a cane. You know, make things that are easy to move around. So let's say you have like an ottoman for somebody to put their feet up. Don't get some super big heavy one. And maybe if that's all you have, maybe you need to get rid of it and get something lighter so it's easier for them to move it. So you don't find them hurting themselves as they try to do that, because they may not recognize it. So try to make everything more comfortable and easy and accessible for them, you know? For instance, you might have to get different kinds of chairs or something so that they can get in and out more easily, you know? Again, we sometimes choose a lot of that stuff based on the design or other sorts of things, but we have to rethink about our households in these cases. Adequate lighting, especially because you've heard me already say that dementia can affect people's ability to see, especially with Alzheimer's. So make sure that their environments are very bright. Like this office is really bright for a reason. Like we have people who come to this office all the time with dementia. Like we need to make sure that they can see everything. And that's why you see things are very uncluttered and things are out of the way. But make sure this stuff is bright. You might have to encourage people to increase the amount of lighting in their home, because anything that people can't see might become a challenge for somebody who has dementia, and it becomes a safety issue. And finally, make sure that the temperature is comfortable for what people want, you know? So I, for instance, prefer like a cooler temperature in my household. And the thing is, we're gonna talk a little bit later about agitation, and agitation can come when people feel uncomfortable. And temperature is one of the biggest things around that, right? Like I wore this kind of light jacket today because I wasn't sure how warm or cool it would be in here. And I know if it's too cool, I'm going to get really agitated and uncomfortable. I also know if I wore a heavier jacket, that would be too heavy and it would distract me from teaching. So I had to find the right jacket for today, you know? But just keep that in mind. And that may not just be the environment, but it also may be the clothes and things that you put on people, stuff like that, you know? In terms of daily tasks, it's really important that care partners find a way of maintaining as much routine as possible. Routine is really important. Like what I was saying about that visitor of last week who came for our social activities, he was used to the routine. You know, he knew that he would come and they would be here and then he would leave. And then, you know, his wife disrupted the routine for a good reason. She needed to get information for our staff, but he was used to the routine. He knows he comes here. He knows who he sees, all that stuff. Now, if he saw me, would he remember my name? No. If he saw me in public, would he remember that I work here? No. That's meaningless. When he sees me here at the office, he always waves at me because he knows that I'm just part of this environment, you know? But that's okay. So having these routines, having this consistency for people with dementia is really important. It helps structure, and it actually, this is a good behavior management thing, is when there's consistency, there's less worry, there's less fear, there's less going on that can tug at the brain and make some of those challenges. So having consistency, doing the same thing very frequently is good. Continue meaningful activities and focus on their abilities. So again, like let's say somebody likes to take a walk, but they're not able to walk as much. Maybe you take the walk with them while they're riding in their chair, you know, because that's still meaningful for them, you know. Maybe they really have like a social day where they go and play like card games with their friends. And maybe they're not even able to play the game very well anymore. But maybe just the consistency of that ritual is meaningful for them. But now you need to be involved and go more frequently with them, you know. So trying to make sure that they get to continue doing the things that are meaningful and important to them. Even if they can't do it as well anymore, that doesn't matter as much anymore. It's not about that as much as it is about the consistency and having those choices for themselves. Remaining flexible and forgiving as things change. Again, like as some of this happens, for instance, maybe you got really relied on having them go to the store with you, and at some point you can't have them go to the store with you because it just doesn't work anymore, you know, and it's just not viable anymore. Adapting the environment, what we talked about, and sometimes it's not just the home, but even in your workplaces and things like that, try to figure out how you can make them more dementia friendly, you know, and you're going to be taking people out into the world where things are not dementia friendly. Our world is generally not very friendly towards dementia. So be conscious of what kind of environment you might be taking someone to, you know? Maybe you take someone somewhere and it doesn't work very well. you decide not to take them back because it's just too much, Like I go to CVS quite frequently. Like that's where I go get my pharmacy and stuff like that. CVS to me is a chaotic environment. Like just, there's always too many people there. There's always chit chat, whatever. That's just my perception. So maybe I don't take somebody to CVS anymore, You don't always know where it's going to be, but supermarkets, things like that, maybe it's just too much, And that might change over time. So we have to be conscious of how to negotiate and adapt that for ourselves as well. Because we can't change the supermarket, right? But maybe you go to a different supermarket. Take breaks when you need them. Again, like they need a break too. You can't just constantly, that's one way they're very different than children. They're older adults generally. They don't have as much energy, but also we don't have as much energy. And so we have to be conscious of making sure that we make time for breaks. We can't just be doing things all the time. It can be too much. And at some point, we and them are going to get cognitively worn out. You know how your body gets tired? Your brain gets tired too. We just don't openly talk about it as much. So making sure there's time for breaks, Don't try to do 100 errands in a day with them. Try to do 2. That might be enough as it is, And finally, just try to keep your sense of humor around a lot of this, even in the day in and day out. Because it's tough, but there are still moments of humor and joy and ways to connect with each other, And sometimes it's better than rather than getting hung up on it, trying to laugh it away, because it's not under anybody's control anymore, The things we can try to focus on, honor routines, rituals, and personal preferences as much as possible. That's why I was encouraging that if you can get to know people, but also as you can encourage care partners to get to know them and find some of these details out, because there may be those subtle little things that people don't know about each other that will help to make being a care partner and receiving care easier in the future, And as long as they're within safe guidelines of things, Again, my grandmother was a very strong Catholic. Like she always had votive candles going, She always had her Virgen de Guadalupe candle always going. If I was caring for her, I would never think to do that. But that might be something that actually does agitate her and I wouldn't have known, Now, should she be lighting the candle on her own? Probably not. I don't want my, a older person with dementia who may be having movement problems and other things, trying to light a candle, but maybe we light the candle together. Maybe we make a point out of that every day we double check the candle or something like that, just to have some routine around it, But so think about those routines, rituals, things that matter to people, and see where you can continue to integrate them. Always consider the time of day. And we're not going to get deep into this, but one of the things to keep in mind is that some people, and it can be more frequent than you'd imagine, have what's called sundowning, which is when the sun goes down, because of that environmental change, it causes a cognitive change in them and they can become more difficult to deal with at night. They can get agitated, fearful, other things, So be conscious of the time of day. For instance, somebody who's like I'm a very slow riser. It takes me a long time to get going in the morning. I don't really feel like punchy and really ready to go until after 10 a.m. So I'm bringing this up because if somebody was caring for me, they may try to get me to do something at 6 a.m. and find them just extremely lethargic and don't want to do it. And I might not be able to control that because my natural inclination is to not be doing things super early in the morning. Whereas late at night, my brain really starts to get going. I really like to do stuff late at night. And I have to consciously right now calm myself down. Well, imagine if I start losing that kind of conscious ability to control that. I may be super annoying that it's like you're ready to go to bed at 11 p.m. and I'm getting all riled up and want to watch TV and read a book and stuff, even if I don't fully understand why I'm doing those things. And you're like, I'm just exhausted. I had to drag you around all day and now you're getting energetic? Like, what's wrong with you? So we keep that in mind, is that the time of day may affect different people in different ways, And there may be ups and downs. And again, that may change over time. Provide validation and reassurance, verbal, visual, physical. It's going to be okay. We're going to get there. We'll get this done soon. Those sort of things. Try to find ways of doing that without lying to people, obviously, too. Trying to still honor them as best you can. You may need to redirect them sometimes. I bet you that the doctor's appointment is going to be good, even though you know that they're going to do something that the person may not want or whatever. But try to help guide and try to be reassuring and supportive of them. Make your request positive and action-oriented. It's time to take our pills. Let's try it this way, instead of, like we were saying before, don't do this, or have you taken your pills yet? Try to reframe it as doing things, action-oriented. Let's get it done together, trying to do things together when possible, but being positive with the language. And again, the more that you can do things with and not for people, the better. Hey, it's time for us to take our medication, so let's sit down together and let's, and maybe you don't take medication. Maybe you just, put a vitamin in your mouth or whatever, but maybe that thing of doing it together helps. Let's make lunch together. It's time for us to go to the store, Again, people are gonna have to change their lifestyles around all of this because the person that they're caring for cannot process the world in the same way that we did. And that's not necessarily a deficit, it is a change. but we still want to honor and give them an opportunity to still enjoy and have a high quality of life and give them some of that autonomy to control some of their life while also trying to make sure that they're safe, that they're taking their medications, all the things that go along with that still, right? It's called the IDEA strategy. So before we dive into it, all behavior has meaning, right? Like, especially when you're dealing with somebody who has dementia, they're going to be struggling with communication. They may not be able to process words as well. Their feelings may be more volatile. But if you can take a step back from that, anything they're trying to communicate, they're just trying to say something to you. They're just trying to communicate something, usually to help themselves and to help you ideally with that too. So how do we look at what's the meaning of the behavior to the person, right? Like, instead of our interpretation, how do we start understanding why they might be behaving that way, you know? Because possible meanings, maybe they're sad or angry or fearful, right? Maybe they're uncomfortable or not feeling well, they're in pain. This is a real sad part, is that sometimes people with dementia start to lose their ability to understand and communicate their own pain. And right, we already talked about people with dementia who are older, it's not like they only have dementia. They probably have other physical ailments that are affecting them. And so they may not feel well in other ways, but not be able to communicate it as well anymore. And so that could be an underlying thing around discomfort or pain. They might be sick. You might see a change in their behavior, even if you've been caring for somebody for a while and you're adjusting, but it might be because there's an underlying sickness and they can't do that, like an infection or something else that is affecting them, and they don't know how to communicate it to you. And also, they just get frustrated or bored in the same way that we do, right? Again, I hate to keep using the example of children, but it's sort of parallel in that, like, sometimes you have a toddler who's misbehaving because they're just not being engaged enough. Well, it's the same with an adult. I mean, don't you feel like that sometimes? You know, sometimes you're just having to wait somebody and you're like, you just start getting kind of agitated. You're like, there's nothing to do and I don't want to just sit here. Now we all have our like magic little phones to constantly distract us, for better or for worse. But for somebody with dementia, they may be frustrated or bored. And that could be some of the cause of this, especially, I briefly touched upon it. There's a behavior called wandering where people just leave. And some of them, like you're talking about people who can drive, like they'll get in their car and drive away. And then like an hour later, they won't even know where they are. They're just lost. And they don't even remember why they left the house. But a lot of the times that's caused by frustration or boredom because there's not enough for them to engage them at home, which is part of the reason we were talking about meaningful activities in the last section. Try to keep people kind of meaningfully involved in stuff helps to navigate some of these behaviors. So, but behaviors are generally they're not done to annoy us. This is a hard part for care partners. Well, they're just being so annoying today. They're not doing it because they want to annoy you. Can you imagine if you were being cared for? Let's say that somehow inside of your dementia brain, you could look outside yourself. You wouldn't be wanting to do that to annoy the person who's caring for you, you know? You're probably doing it because you're trying to communicate something, but you don't know how, and that's annoying. But they're not, people who have dementia aren't doing things to annoy us. Again, when this gentleman who was here last week was trying to say, okay, it's time for us to go, he wasn't trying to annoy his wife. He just genuinely thought that it was time for them to leave because that was the routine and ritual. And this one time she was changing it. And so he just kept on asking him to leave because that's what he was used to doing, was it was time for them to go. And he could not recognize the circumstance around it. And if you looked at him, he seemed very functional, but he could not recognize that in that moment. And he was not doing that to annoy her. It's not due to poor listening. Again, their listening skills are already affected, but it's not that they're not hearing you, it's that they're not able to understand what they're hearing from you. So it's not that they're not listening, and this is something you'll hear from care partners. They're not listening to me today. Well, they don't really listen in the same way anymore, so it's not that they're choosing not to listen to you. And they're just not done on purpose. That's what we're trying to emphasize around all this stuff. People who have dementia can no longer control the outcomes that are happening in their brain. So they're not doing a lot of these things on purpose. They can't remember. Their brain can't process the same way anymore. So they're not doing it on purpose. So the key is not for us to take it personal and to help train care partners remember to not take it personally. Now that's tough because I can't just say to you, if you're annoyed with the mom you're taking care of, don't take it personally. That's extremely condescending. So I can't do that. But how do I help them to say, well, is she trying to annoy you today? You mentioned that you guys skipped breakfast this morning because you were rushing over to this appointment today. Maybe she's hungry. Maybe we can get her a snack, you know? Sometimes you have to redirect the care partners too, because it's very easy to get caught up on this, right? Like I told you about that situation where my grandmother was trying to change the tire on her car. I took it personally because it felt like her behavior was keeping me from going to my job and I was going to get in trouble. That's all personal me stuff. I couldn't in a moment understand that she wasn't trying to annoy me, that she wasn't not listening to me. She wasn't trying to do this to me on purpose. She genuinely thought that she needed to go to TJ, and the best way to do that was to fix the car in this way. And I needed to put myself in that situation. But that was difficult for me at that time. I was young too, you know? But you can't take it personally. So the idea approaches to help kind of depersonalize some of this. So it's a 3-step approach. Identify the behavior, explore, and then adjust. So identifying the behavior, it's helpful to try and be specific about what you're doing with that. Try to get down to what the specific behavior is. Explore, try to understand what the meaning of the behavior is and understand the cause of it. And finally, adjust. Do something different, because if the way you're doing it isn't working, you have to try a different way of doing it. And sometimes it helps to either brainstorm with others, but sometimes even brainstorm with the person that you're caring for. And they may have a limited capacity for this, but maybe it helps to solve the problem. So when you're identifying the behavior, think about asking yourself, can you describe the behavior? What is it that they're doing? They're acting fidgety. They keep on trying to get out of the car. They keep on pushing the shopping cart in a different direction. So what is the specific behavior? Do others see it the same way, especially if it's an ongoing sort of thing? They're always trying to drive the car, even though we've told them that they can't, that they're not allowed to drive anymore. Well, maybe that's your perception. They're always trying to drive the car. You know, maybe the other people don't see it that way. Maybe they're like, no, they're not always trying to drive the car. So sometimes it helps to get some triangulation, if you will, get somebody else to give their perspective on this, you know? And also does the behavior bother others or you, you know, or yourself? But don't assume that because it bothers you or bothers somebody else, that's universal. Again, check in with other people, you know? And there's one thing about bother, but also is it safe is another thing to get in there. Because I've watched this with care partners. They start to kind of baby and corral somebody into a situation where it's like, that's not safe and that's not safe and you can't do this and you can't do this. And the next thing you know, the person's just lost all their autonomy. They're just sitting there by themselves alone because their care partners box them in for good reason, for fears about safety and other things. But sometimes it might be helpful if those care partners hey, Joaquin, what do you think about this? It's like, actually, maybe it's okay to have them have the butter knife to put the peanut butter on their bread. Maybe they struggle to do that, but maybe just holding the knife, they're not going to stab you with it. It's probably not going to hurt them, you know? But you would have to observe that situation to be around that. But so this is something that for you to help with as you're dealing with people in your community, your clients, those things, but also helping care partners understand. Again, like, look at the behavior. What is the behavior? What specifically is going on? Are more of us seeing that? And is it really that bothersome? Because also maybe some of it's just, we can just let it go, you know? Again, in the case of my grandmother, her trying to change that tire, dangerous for her and possibly dangerous for others, right? So that's a little bit. But there's other things she did that I would get frustrated with that maybe weren't, you know, does it really matter if she does it that way? Is it really hurting or affecting anybody? Or is it just me just getting annoyed because I want to be annoyed with her? You know, I mean, it's easy as a care partner to get lost in your own feelings and forget that sometimes they just need to have that thing. Again, I was telling you about this, like this woman who's like tapping her little maraca. Is it really hurting anybody? It's not really, you know? Now, if we're in a situation where nobody else will be affected, it's not a big deal. She was in a facility where there's other needs. Plus, they want to care for her needs. Like I was saying, they wanted her to make sure she got to the bathroom before she had an accident. So that's good. But is her banging a maraca on something really that big of a deal? If it's not bothering anybody? No. So then let her do it. Why does it matter? You know? That's what I was saying about the newspaper. We were perceiving it as that if she didn't have the right newspaper, that she would be upset. But we gave her the newspaper, it didn't bother her, and it made it easier for us to spend time with her so that the outcome was okay. We got hung up on the wrong piece, you know? Step 2, explore why the behavior is occurring. So what is the meaning to the person living with dementia? So not what you think it is, but why do you think they are behaving that way, right? Again, is it hunger? Is it boredom? Is it because that they're starting to feel agitated? Is it because maybe they're more tired, like they didn't sleep as well last night? So maybe, you know, most days they're ready for lunch, but today around lunchtime, they actually need to take a nap instead, you know? So try to see from their perspective, what is it maybe that they can't communicate or are trying to communicate to do this behavior, you know? And again, what are they trying to say or do? Everything that they're doing is some form of communication. And generally resistance or trying not to do something isn't because of an outright no, it's because of something else going on. So trying to explore and understand, why is the behavior occurring? What is it that's driving it? And a lot of times it's those base need kinds of things. It's hunger, it's cold, it's the right temperature, it's around not having something immediately to do, it's feeling lonely, it's those sort of things. And they don't know how to communicate, say, hey, I don't feel this way. They just start acting out, if you will. That's what we tend to call it, but they're not acting out. They don't know how to control the behaviors as much anymore. So try to figure out what's the underlying reason and cause, right? Then finally, adjust. So really, you're going to be the one who has to change. The care partner is going to be the one who change. The person who has dementia cannot change. They're now in this situation where their brain does not process it in the same way anymore. So the care partner has to adjust their behavior, right? Standing in front of my grandmother telling her that it was unsafe to fix the car that way was not going to get her to change. I was telling you some ways that I could have changed my behavior had I had that understanding that I have today, and I didn't have that understanding. That's why it's so valuable what we try to teach people. You have to learn how to adjust. The care partner has to learn how to adjust. And you can influence the behavior, especially through some of these things we were talking about before. By being reassuring, by being calm, by trying to redirect things, you can influence people's behavior. Fighting with my grandmother about the car wasn't going to help. But if I got to redirect her a little bit, try to understand why it was so important for her to do that, and see if there was a solution that we could have both mutually come together with, you know? And I told you I was under limited time. I was supposed to be at my job. Well, maybe I need to bring somebody else in. And that's actually what eventually solved the problem, is I finally called my dad. And he came from work, and it was unfortunate, but he was the primary caregiver. And so he came down from his job, and his job was a lot more flexible than mine was, fortunately. And so he was able to come down, and he was able to negotiate with her, and they got a solution to the problem. And I left because I had to go to work. But so it took somebody, I was not going to solve the problem in that case. So I had to adjust and bring in somebody else to solve the problem, you know? Could I have done a better job in the moment? Sure. But ultimately the solution was me not trying to solve the problem, but bringing in somebody else to solve it. And finally, figure out where you might be able to adjust the environment, because frequently you can adjust the environment. And that's some of what starts to happen. So I'll give you a big, broad example about safety in regards to some of this. So some people lived on a split level house where the master bedroom was upstairs, right? Well, the thing was, as the person who had developed dementia, the husband, he wanted, when he saw the stairs, because he wasn't in control of his things as much, he would want to go upstairs or downstairs from his bedroom. But he was no longer physically able to go up and down the stairs safely. And this started to create a problem because he was going to fall, and that was a problem for the family. So they eventually installed curtains in front of the stairs so that you couldn't see the stairs directly. So by him no longer being able to see the stairs, he'd stopped thinking he had to go upstairs for that. Well, but then where's he going to sleep? Well, so then they took one of the downstairs rooms and they made that his bedroom. And so the bedroom was just now downstairs. They just completely adapted the environment. They didn't move out of the house. They couldn't afford to do that. But by blocking away the stairs, and not blocking it completely, it wasn't like they put a wall there, but just by removing his ability to see the stairs, he didn't notice to go up there. And after a while, he started to become comfortable with the idea that his bedroom was actually just in one of those other rooms. Now, they had to give up a downstairs room for that. You know, I think it was like a living room or something, but it worked and it was safer for him. So they adapted and adjusted for that. So you always have to be adaptable, and the environment frequently is something you can change, you know? One of the things, for instance, we recommend for bathroom environments, and I've seen this in certain memory care facilities that I've toured it. What color do bathrooms tend to be? White, right? It's just porcelain, white on white. As your vision starts to go, even as you get older, it's harder to notice that. White is actually, there's very little contrast. You can't tell the difference. So actually, just in replacing the toilet seat with something that's colorful, like a red or a black one, it helps people with dementia go to the bathroom easier because they know where the toilet is. It becomes more obvious compared to all the white. Because lots of people who have dementia have bathroom accidents because they can't get it to the right place, you know, especially men with their little tube that may get off target there. So by just changing the toilet seat color, that helps so that they know where the toilet is, you know. So again, in certain memory care facilities, there will be more contrasts and different things in different colors so that they can help guide people's attention to the right places and have them avoid the other stuff, you know, including bathtubs may be different colors, other stuff to help guide people towards where they should or shouldn't be, you know. So those are the kind of things we might be able to need to change, you know. And again, like I was talking about, especially when it regards to safety, but even other things, you might want to rearrange a bathroom or rearrange a kitchen or something like that. So it makes the day-to-day behaviors easier to manage and easier to control. And you might have to continually adjust those as somebody's disease gets worse over time. That said, huge sudden changes in behavior, major changes in memory or mood, a lot more confusion, sudden increases in anger if people start hitting and yelling that they weren't doing before in regards to resistant behaviors, sudden wetting of the bed or not getting to the bathroom on time, or huge fevers or seizures or things like that, things that are really, really out of context. That's the kind of case where if you hear about this stuff, you should need to encourage people to go have the person checked out, the person with dementia checked out by a doctor immediately. Because this is out of context. These are uncontrollable things that might happen. Like wetting the bed is actually not a controllable behavior, There's not much you can do to adjust for that kind of behavior. And this may be a wider situation where, because for instance, wetting the bed may not be a permanent thing. It could, not a brain change. It could just be that they have some kind of infection and they haven't been able to communicate it, But so if any of this stuff bubbles up as you're helping care partners with their people who have dementia, but also mentioning this, if they see these huge changes, talk to the doctor. Because there's lots of ways that we can adjust certain kinds of behaviors, but ones that are really out of context like this, that's not a behavioral change. That could be a medical issue, and that medical issue needs to be addressed. And sometimes, again, with those medical issues underlying, and somebody may not be able to communicate them, their behavior might become worse because they don't know how to communicate around this thing, and they're getting frustrated or developing other kinds of behaviors that go with that. So needs of the care partners. The thing about care partners is that they just almost never take care of themselves, right? Because they have to do so much work to care for someone else. It's not uncommon that people who are care partners aren't eating well. And I don't mean that they're not eating enough. They just usually aren't always eating healthier foods because they're not making time to do that because they're usually so focused on trying to help somebody else get the nutrition they need. And they're also usually not getting a physical activity. Because again, usually with somebody who has dementia, they're not as physically active anymore. And so the care partners tend to get drawn into that, unfortunately. They usually have sleep and stress management problems. Being a care partner is super stressful already. And so if you're already doing that all the time, that's already stressful. But sleep challenges are common because stress inhibits our sleep. Also because of routines and other things that sometimes get thrown off. But the other thing is some people who develop dementia don't sleep well, and they interrupt sleep, and they interrupt our sleep by moving around the house or by waking up frequently. I mean, it's not uncommon for some people, married couples, who eventually have to accept the port where the person who has dementia needs to sleep in a different room. And they may get to keep the master bedroom because that's where they're comfortable sleeping, and the spouse has to move to a different room because they can't get enough sleep because of that situation. So sleep and stress become disrupted, and care partners are frequently struggling to manage these things on their own. They lack social and cognitive activity. It's really vital for any of us as we get older to continue interacting with people, doing new things, all that stuff. And when you're working with, sometimes caring for somebody, especially as they're getting worse because of dementia, specifically Alzheimer's, as they get into later and later stages, people don't have as much time to interact with other people. They become isolated. They're not doing new things that help keep their brain stimulated. That's not healthy. That could even increase their own risk for dementia. So they're lacking in social and cognitive activities that would help keep themselves healthy. Injury prevention becomes an issue, especially if they have to do physical support for people, helping them get in and out of the shower, things like that, And that's why we teach classes about it, safely do it to safely take care of the person who has dementia, but also to take care of the person themselves, because it's easy to get injured there, and then they may not have enough time to go to a doctor for themselves and not address their own physical needs. So they're not always good about, and that can maybe not even those sorts of injuries, but things like you got a little cut when you were making a sandwich, things like that they're not addressing because they get so caught up in giving care. They may not be seeing healthcare providers regularly, especially if they're having to do a lot of that for their person they're caring for. They may not be making time for their own appointments and things like that. And finally, the health, legal, and financial information, if it's being done, it may not be up to date. And as some of these things change, it may need to be updated. And for those of you who have dealt with any of that before, in terms of the legal circumstances of aging, it's a lot of work. It's not like it just gets done. You don't just shoot an email over to your lawyer, So these things can start to fall off track. For instance, somebody, like say their spouse didn't have dementia, may have been really good about setting up the trust and the will and all the other things. But then after the dementia happened, they never updated these documents, which then becomes super problematic later when legal things start to bubble up around that, because the person who has dementia is no longer legally allowed to make some of these decisions or not capable of making the decisions. They may not even understand. They won't understand some of the decisions they're supposed to be making. But the documentation hasn't been kept up to date. And this becomes very challenging later in life, especially with people who are being affected by dementia. So it's very hard. Generally, care partners are not taking care of a lot of the things that they have to do, because caring for someone else who is losing this kind of capacity, psychological and cognitive capacity, but also physical capacity, becomes overwhelming. So the ways that we can address that, we need to make sure that they have the information and education they need to be able to do that, So that's why we offer classes. This is why you're learning how to become educators yourself, so you can help them and train them and give them more information and support around that stuff. They also need emotional support. So that's just part of our job when you're helping people who are caring for those with dementia. A big part of my job, and I knew this when I got this job, my job is not just intellectual. I don't just theorize about things. A big part of my job is going to these classes and having to accept that people need me to also hear their stories and help them to guide them back towards resources because they are emotionally hurting. Every part of this is difficult. I'm talking in an intellectual way about how I learned how to grow and deal with my grandmother, but I'm also pointing out to you that there was a lot of emotional challenges that I didn't know how to engage with. And it wasn't just me, it was my family, my father, my aunts and uncles, my cousins who were struggling with that too. And we didn't always know how to support each other on that. And now I know that there's resources like this organization that can help, but the emotional support is really necessary. People need validation. People need to know that they're not alone around these things. And I've heard over and over again from people who heavily participate in our support groups in this organization that many of the times they thought, I don't need to go to a support group. And then they started going and realized this is exactly what I need because I need to know that I'm not the only one who's going through this. Respite. People need a break from having to be care partners, which is why adult day services like PACE and other things can be helpful, but also, and there's other kinds of adult day services for people, but even in some cases, for instance, we have a respite program that's based on volunteers. And also there are paid respite services, like Home Instead is an organization here. They're a for-profit, but you can pay them and they can come in and have a care partner to give respite for somebody. But people can't care for people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And unfortunately, many people do end up in that situation, especially if people are living at home, right? And especially for those of us who know that some of these communities in South County, especially, people don't have the means to pay for respite, don't have the means to send somebody off to an adult day center, may don't have the information to know that they can have their person go to PACE. And so they feel stuck. But everybody needs a break at some point. You cannot just be a care partner all the time. Nobody can do that. It's too much. It's overwhelming. They need social connections. And so anytime that you can make space for people to be able to connect with others through things like support groups, but also what we call social activities. And we offer social activities, and I'll talk about those a little bit at the end of this presentation. And finally, people need safety resources. You've heard me touch upon this a whole bunch. We have a whole entire class called Safety at Home that's all about safety, and we teach this all the time because it's such a vital class. But for people living at home, you've already been hearing me talk about changes you have to make to the environment to manage some of those things, especially when it's in a case of things like wandering, like I was saying, where people, an adult can just walk right out of the house and you can't lock somebody up. That's just, in my opinion, inhumane and unethical to take somebody who has dementia and just lock them in a room. We do not in any way, our organization does not support that. You can't lock someone in a home. And at the same time, what happens if they're an adult and they feel free to just put their shoes on and just leave? Because an hour later, like I was saying, they may not remember where they were going because they had nowhere to go in the first place, So wandering is a safety risk. Home environments can be a safety risk. Like I was saying, again, a woman had access to the bleach and poured bleach for her grandkids, So we have to be conscious of that sort of thing and giving people support around that, And fortunately in San Diego, there's a lot of great organizations that are supporting safety. The Sheriff's Office does a lot of great stuff around wandering, and also organizations like Jewish Family Services and others do like home repair and stuff like that. So trying to help with some of this, because look, it could be something as simple as maybe they just need like a grab bar in the shower from now on so that the person getting in and out of the shower can, but you and I can't install that. I can't go install one of those in my house. It's got to be done properly. So there are resources here to support that sort of thing. So safety is also a real critical one to make sure that we're taking care of the people, not just the people who have dementia, but the care partners and the environment, because it takes a whole community of us to take care of people who have dementia. Because this is what we say through all of our programming. In the absence of effective therapies and a cure, right? I've said that, especially with Alzheimer's, there's no way of reversing it. There's no cure yet. The best medicine we have is good care. And so our responsibility is to become and learn these skills to be good carers for these other people, but also to train the people in our community to be that, especially if they're going to be a direct care partner. So finally, Alzheimer's San Diego and you, we're not a huge sized organization, but we have lots of services we offer. So again, you're taking right now some education and training from us. We also have what are called social activities and outings. I've mentioned some of those happen here in the office, like movement and music ones and things like that. They help people to stay active and kind of keeping doing some things. But also we do outings at like museums or parks or things like that. We even have a program called Baseballs, that's where it meets at a local baseball field. Hey, Nellie, come on, have a seat. And in that, like, they talk about memories around baseball. It's super fun, you know? So, but they're a good way for not only for both, because they're made for the person who has dementia and for the person who's caring for them to have some social interactions, try some new things, get to meet some new people and things like that. We support research, especially San Diego is a big hub for research around here. So we do some research-oriented events. Once a year, we have a big panel that we do online where you can join in and ask questions of research doctors just about what's going on with the therapies and the search for a cure for Alzheimer's and other dementias. We do memory screenings. I was telling all of you that having an understanding of somebody's baseline memory helps us so that we're able to know if they're declining or not. So we actually do those here at the office as well. And the nice thing about doing it through us is we're not doing any diagnosis. So if somebody gets their, especially if somebody's fearful about getting this, they just get to take the paper with them. We don't tell anybody else. They don't have to do anything with it if they don't want to. We hope that they take action on it, but they don't have to. Especially if somebody's in a fearful situation where they're afraid they're going to get bad news, come to us. We have what's called Vitals, is a Volunteers in Touch program. For people who are living alone, we have volunteers who will call them to check in on them and have conversations with them and stay socially active with them, even if they can't get out of the home. We have support groups. We have support groups across the entire county. Everywhere in San Diego, you can find a support group that's probably within 20 minutes of you, 15 to 20 minutes. Like, we have support groups all over the place, and also some specialized support groups as well for people who have been diagnosed with specific types of dementia where it's very unique. Like you heard me mention Lewy body. We didn't get into that. I'm not even an expert on it, but by the way, but we have a Lewy body support group because the needs of people who have Lewy body dementia are a little bit different. And some of the support groups are also offered online. So keep that in mind for those people who might need that kind of wider community support. We have a respite program. It's a volunteer-based program. We cannot guarantee that we can match a volunteer with everybody. But that said, we try our best to match a volunteer with a family. The volunteer has some choice in this too, I want to point out, with the idea that volunteer gets connected to the family and is able to provide respite on an ongoing basis, not every day necessarily, but once maybe a month or maybe once every couple of weeks, so that way the care partners have some time off, and these people are highly trained in how to work with somebody who has dementia, so that person having the care and necessity they need. And finally, talk to a dementia expert, which I wish it was better explained here, but the reality is you can call us anytime. You can also drop in the office. We're open. The phone line and the office are open 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. After hours, though, you can leave a message. When you call in, you can also use our website to leave us a message. And that way, we can provide expertise. There are people here in the office right now who can offer all kinds of resources and support and training. So that's what we are. We're this big resource organization with a whole staff. The bulk of our staff, it's almost a third of our staff, is committed to people who can give advice and support to the community in regards to how do you get respite services? How do you find a residential placement home? How do you adjust and look for these things? What does the doctor talk to us about these things? We don't understand what they mean. Please explain them to us. So if people need more of that, encourage people to call us. And again, on our phone lines, we have a translation service, an interpretation service, so we can do it in any language that people call in on. But again, we have like 3 or 4 different staff members over there who are fluent in Spanish and can speak directly with people in Spanish around those sorts of things. And also can have family meetings here if somebody wants to have a meeting here and talk face to face. So that's the phone number. That's our website. So please reach out, because that's what we do. We're a community support organization. And again, not just for the people who are affected directly, but all of you as well. We support professionals very heavily. So cool, we have 15 minutes left. Somehow I managed to be ahead of time on here, which I was not expecting. But that said, Nelly Hernandez, who is she's one of our dementia educators, but she leads all of our Spanish language programming and is, again, spearheading us really in the work we're doing in South County. So I wanted her to come in today to just briefly chat about what she's experiencing and hearing from the Latino community in San Diego in regards to caring for people with dementia, and also answer any other questions you might have. So Nelly, I'll turn it over to you.
So yeah, my name's Nelly Hernandez. I'm one of the dementia educators here in the education department. But before I go on, I want to know, how was your day? And I want to know, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do with your work so that I can better prepare myself to answer your questions, and how you can use this information to support your new role, or if this is a role that you've been in for a while. So could we go around really quick and see what everybody does? We start right here.
Well, my name is Marcos Sigala, and I am outreach specialist.
Tell me again.
Outreach specialist.
Okay.
I promote the program to the community.
Outreach, right.
I can reach different kind of persons, students to adults, and
To
maybe
come
the
get
students
services.
Need to get the service for the parents or.
Fantastic.
My name is Marta Ruiz. I'm an admissions RN supervisor at San Diego PACE program.
Mm-hmm.
So my job is bring people to the program. And just to give you a brief idea, PACE is a program for all-inclusive care
Yes.
for elders. So we have a lot of participants, we call them participants, with dementia issues. So these resource is going to be a wonderful resource for me to refer. And I have tons of questions, so I'm going to let someone.
All right.
introduce.
Cool.
My name is Bianca. I'm the CalGrow's GCAP program manager. So my role is to coordinate trainings for people who are in caregiving professional roles like CNAs, PCAs, home health aides, but then also for community caretakers. So if they are a neighbor, family, friend, anything like that, making sure that they have access to trainings.
Nice. Well, we definitely have access for trainings for them.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Cindy Bocut, and I'm working at the San Diego Pace and Vista as the mental health, behavioral health case manager,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to be providing resources to our participants as they need, and of course also scheduling them with their for their therapeutic services.
Very nice.
Hi, my name is Grace McCullough. I'm a GCAP trainer, and I work for San Diego PACE. I work with Bianca, and my role is to train care providers in the communities for the CalGrow's program. Right?
Cool.
My name is Adam Garcia. I work at Chula Vista as our pharmacy clerk, so I'm just help with the medication management for our participants.
So he said, just help. That's good. That's good that you do that. We need that. We need all the help we can get because our community is staying around longer and growing older, and I'm part of that community too. So I'm glad that you guys were able to sit in on this. And let me just say thank you right now, because I'm hoping that the information that you take and who we are is who you're going to take out to the community and share about how they can connect with us, because it's so important. One of the conversations that I have today with one of the ladies I met with is actually that she shared that there's so many people out there that don't know who we are, and why don't people know about our resource? So we shared some conversation about that, and in reality, we talked about how a lot of it comes from our culture practices and our non-white culture practices, that these are things we don't talk about. And these are things that we don't tell other people about. And we sure definitely wouldn't want somebody to think that we need help and something is changing in our home. How embarrassing would that be? So that's what I'm hoping that you can step in to be that missing piece, to give this organization a voice, to connect with all those people out there that don't know who we are, and that they don't know that they don't have to have anything to come and get services from us. Okay, that is one of the biggest things that I've learned going out into different communities, is helping them understand that they don't have to bring any kind of verification to us. All they need to know is how to reach us. And sometimes that might be me picking up the phone with somebody, and sometimes that might be me sharing a flyer with somebody and explaining how they can utilize the services. It's really getting to meet the person where they're at and figuring out how I can connect them to us. And that alone starts to open up the doors to have these mini conversations and drive some kind of a comfort level to grow. But I know you had questions, so let's get started with just a few questions and see what I can help with.
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful resource, but I want to know if, what would be your preference? To have one person calling you, or will you prefer have a group of person and do a class?
Both. It just really depends on what's going to work for you. There are going to be those individuals that need something to happen right now, and we don't want you to hold back by having them connect with one of our clinical care coaches. So if I know and have identified what kind of support you need right now, or you say like, wow, this person can really benefit from talking to somebody right now because A, they're not going to do it on their own, or B, they're not going to be interested in following up without me being by them, then I'm going to pick up the phone and say, hey, this is Julie, and she wants to speak to a clinical care coach. Or I always encourage some kind of role play, because I want Julie to be able to be picking up the phone on her own. And usually what I say is like, it's real easy. Whoever answers the phone there, you're just gonna say, can I speak to a clinical care coach? That's it. Could I speak to someone? Because they don't even have to elaborate what they want, how they'll connect them to them, and then they can start their conversation. But that doesn't mean that we can talk about how you can connect a group of people that you say, you know what, these 5 people that I usually see, they really would benefit from taking a communications class. Because then I can help you understand, hey, well, when's the next communications class coming up, and how can I get them in there? Because not everybody Zooms, but you don't have to worry, depending on where you're at. We do have some other sites that I go out to in person, and we can talk about that as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that because I work in the enrollment department, admissions. So through our department, it comes one by one, right? So we do the assessment and we determine. Sometimes participants who are very advanced in dementia, depending on the site they're going to be assigned, there's not the complete resources that might fit their needs. So those participants sometimes are not approved for the program. So this is going to be a great resource for them to, okay, we are not your option, but here is someone who can help you. And the other side, I mean, a lot more participants that are approved for the program. We have a group that starts every first of the month, and families needs these wonderful tips that he presented in the class. And it will be very helpful to have these families to have this kind of guidance.
When those families come in, do they come in like your family, different families, you all came in today to some type of orientation? Is that how you see them when they all come in? Okay, so each family is still starting on their own. Got it.
So I think it will be wonderful to have identify participants who have dementia, different stages, to have the family have this wonderful resource, so they come into the program, receive the PACE benefits, plus, I mean, this.
That's good. That sounds like something we can talk about a little bit further in detail, maybe, to see how it might look or how it might work. The thing we would want to make sure is that, number one, that those families would actually come back together.
That's what I'm asking.
And if that's the challenge, then it would be trying to create a way so that that family actually understands how to connect with us into these classes without ever having to worry about coming back. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because then it wouldn't be fair for really anybody to say, hey, we have families come in, and then we all go, including those families, make plans of either creating this new stop for them to get this information, and then only one family comes, and then what happens to the others? You know, we're still gonna have to figure out how to serve them. So that's something we can kind of think about what would work. It might just be really us working with you to help you understand how you can set them up, and then you can just set them up for the next upcoming whatever class may be.
And the phone number that you provide, it's 24-hour service? Or?
No, it's 8:30 to 5 Monday through Friday. The only thing we really don't provide here is we don't provide crisis support.
Okay.
This is not something that you would say like, your situation, that's a crisis situation, call them right now. Because this is not crisis support. We also don't provide or we don't have a way for us to step in and say, you're looking for placement, you haven't found any, let me call somebody and, help you out by saying, hey, well, they're with us, we can help you get placement. We don't do that. Okay.
Just because we do not provide care management. That's not what we do.
Is it more like this? For example, maybe I'm working with an agitated family member because they love their loved one so much, and they're just agitated with the lack of knowledge they have with the family member's new diagnosis of dementia. And then I can say, hey, why don't you call this number? And I know that between these hours, they would answer the phone, and you can ask them questions about this. You can tell them what your mom's experiencing, and then is that the best way? Like, I'm thinking that's how I could utilize your guys' services with our participants when I'm engaging with them.
That's exactly right. Because then they can really, knowing what services are provided here, this slide is really what you always want to lead with. Like, you can go there and get all these services at no cost to you. I think it would be really helpful. You know what? It's not on here, but you can even ask to have a family meeting. That might be somewhere you want to start, because that'll be helpful in that sense. Okay. And furthermore, you can actually give them the encouragement to jump into these classes on their own if that's something that they're interested in, because then they don't have to worry about sharing it with anybody or anybody knowing. You can monitor yourself when you want to go in, when you want to leave, or learn as you go, because we don't all have the same learning capacity.
And this line is bilingual if they contact here.
The phone number is going to answer at the front desk, and then they're just going to connect them to whoever they need to talk to. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? No? No? How would you share this for the people that are caregivers?
I would present it to them and let them know, like when we're doing the training, when we're speaking about dementia, refer them that there's free services and support through this program, and it's able and available for them as long as they call, or like you said, they can
register in person, or they can register online. I think it's really important, because the thing that sometimes a care person or a care partner doesn't really acknowledge in the very beginning is, oh man, this is going to be hard. Or when it does get hard, oh, nobody gets it. And don't you understand, I really need this job because I'm just like everybody else. I need to work, and I can't afford to leave it. And then when that happens, guess what? They're out, and so is the family that doesn't have the care partner anymore, if they're not related, right? So that's how we can definitely be helpful for the caregiver, is them not only amplifying their skills, but it's also going to help for them to probably learn how to maintain a work-life balance better. So that way we can all keep the systems running.